So we're going to have a look at some trees now, and in particular, we're going to look at the surfaces of the trees and the sort of the form that happens on the surface as well. But before we get into that, it's important to remind you that not to be overly concerned that you're making a reproduction of these photographs or a reproduction in some way of anything I'm doing. Was important that you, I hope, follow our little process. And this is only one way of having a look at things. There are many ways and many approaches to how we could paint trees or anything for that matter. What I'm trying to do with this series of exercises is to give you one option to have a look at, to consider how you at least look before you paint, look at your subject and see how it can be broken down. So that's the main thing. And if you can get that habit, that is an important achievement and a learning process for you. So if we look at this tree, for example, one of the things about it is, if we were using the words that we've used before, like shape, let's look for shapes within this tree. Big shapes. Always start with the biggest shapes and then work towards detail. So for example, what I'm just doing now is I'm going to get a little marker so we can make marks in this picture, maybe make it slightly bigger there. But I could draw, I'm using this around this area here and just say, okay, there's an area of that tree that's obviously lighter because the sun's catching it. It's also greener because of the way the light is, and perhaps there's more moss on that side, but tonally it's lighter. We could almost say, okay, let's have a mid-tone, a mid-area, there, which is, you can see slightly lighter or slightly darker, but still has some light in it. And then if you take the third area, we could argue, well, there's a darker tone. There's hardly any light patches in that area. So if we were really having to say, look, we're only allowed 3 areas, there's 3 that we could begin with. And that allows us to begin to get into the painting. Then, if we look at the second word, which is edges, well, you can see that without my little lines that I took away a moment ago, the edges obviously graduate very carefully. So the light blends and bleeds across this object slowly from light across the dark. So we know then that we're physically trying to make the paint bleed slowly. So we're not going to have necessarily hard edges. Then if we look at the marks that are on this tree, we could argue, well, and I'm going to use a little pen here, but there are dark, you see dark areas here and slashes here where there's obviously cuts and bumps within the tree. So there are sharper, smaller areas. And of course, there are all these little dots and squiggles and scratches and peppered bits of the tree where the bark is rugged and it's rough over many years. So we want to think, well, what sort of brush marks could we use to create this surface? And in the later stages, that's what you're going to do. So you're going to begin with the 3 big tones. Then you're going to blend them to create the softer edges. And then we're going to begin to think about the surface, the smaller detail, if you want to call it that, and how we deal with that. So that's the approach we're going to take. And as I say, if we follow that in each case, you'll get a habit and a method at least to find your way into a painting. What I want to do is just run through what I have in front of me here. This is a fairly small board. You can see the relative size of my hand. It's about A3 size, I would say, which I've just rubbed across with some, I think it's burnt sienna, just always to kill the white. In most cases anyway, you don't want to be working on a pure white background, but occasionally, but very rarely. Over here, color wise, again, I'm not getting overly anxious about color because this is an exercise about surface and structure of something, and I want to focus on that. Otherwise it becomes so inhibiting, that you're worried about all the colors and why is it not exactly the same green or whatever. That's for another day, okay? This is about structure and surface. But what I have got here is titanium white at the moment, a little cadmium yellow. It's light cadmium yellow, but honestly, any yellow at this point will do. Ultramarine. This is Indian red, but actually burnt sienna or any reddish brown will do. And this is burnt umber, which is a deeper brown, as you can see, and that's what we'll try and work with right now. The first thing I want to do is draw out a structure to work on, draw out the shape, if you like, of this sort of tree. I'm going to work from one of the images that hopefully you have, but again, I'm not going to use time up being worrying about, oh, it's exactly that height and that width, because I'm going back to the old thing. We want to construct structures here and nothing really else. So I'm going to go ahead and just occupy what I'm doing, by the way, just to remind you. This little brush, by the way, you can see the damage on it. It's quite all over the place, but it's actually because of that, it's impossible to get a lovely, smooth, curvy line. Therefore, it's ideal for this subject, which is lumpy and rugged and all the rest of it. One thing I forgot, this is liquid in this jar, which I'm using to loosen up my paint. You could use turpentine, of course, for this exercise. And either way, we're not going to use loads and loads of this, but that's really all you need. It's not important to worry about linseed oil and all these other things. Apart from the wee brush I just mentioned as well. Just to let you see, I'm going to be using just this, which is slightly less than half an inch, soft, now fairly firm but soft nylon brush, cut flat across the top. Then I have this much smaller brush we're using later on, which is also a little filbert brush. It's rounded at the top a wee bit and flat at the sides. Cheap brush, but for these exercises will be fine. And I may use this brush, which is again a filbert, round top, flat side. This is slightly rougher. This is more of a bristle-haired brush, which can be good for rubbing in surfaces and whatever. And I may later on use this big soft round brush, which is like a number 12, again nylon. But we'll see about that. Let's go back to our little rugged uneven brush that I was talking about, and let's try and get some information in. And you can see already what I'm trying to do is I'm making jiggly sort of marks already, even at this early stage in the painting. So this little brush, you can see, is all broken marks, and it's kind of nice for that reason. And this is coming down to the base of the tree here, and I'm working fast. I'm working really very fast, and therefore I know there will be most likely some lack of accuracy in measurement, but I want to get into surfaces. Okay, let's focus here. There's our big tree trunk, whatever, and then there's a nice sort of curve here, and then down here there's this nice branch disappearing off the side here, and again you can see the lumpiness of my brush marks, and then there's a lovely sort of sweepy thing going on, a curve there, which takes us way out here somewhere. And then it's quite hard to see actually, because I at first thought there were two branches here, but the tree actually goes right on up, and we don't actually see a V shape in there, so we'll leave that for the moment. And we've essentially got an outline here, okay? There is a gap here actually. I've just realized it. There is a gap between a branch and the main tree right in there. And so we'll work with that. And what we're going to do then is start with the whole business of these tonal blocks that we talked about earlier on. So I'm going to get into those fairly quickly now. We talked about establishing major blocks, shapes. And if you look at the image, you know, you'll have 1/3, you know, one section which is lighter and also has a slightly greeny tint to it, which is why I put yellow on my palette. Then you have this slightly deeper, muddier, earthier color, and then on the right hand side a much deeper shadow area. So there's essentially that's a base there. So what I'm going to do with the lighter area, just work from left to right. A little bit of titanium white, little bit of lemon in there, or sorry, yellow, cadmium yellow. It's not not very much, and obviously that makes a quite a light tone. Then what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of the burnt umber here, put a little bit of that in, just you can see it maybe going over to away from just pure yellow, make it a wee bit richer, so we'll get in there with a wee bit more yellow. But you can see it there now. But if I then just smidgen a wee bit more of the umber in there, it just subdues it, and that's, you know, really all for that section. Okay, you know, I'm not going to get too hung up on the color and the things. Over here, I'm going to take another little bit of white. This time I'm going to use the umber, which is a cooler brown, as you know. You can see it makes kind of a almost like a grayish tone, you know. So make a wee bit more of that up. So we'll use that, but we do want it to be tonally darker than this. So that's the lightest. We want this, so we need to add enough of the umber to make it the value, if you like, darker. And this, at this point in time, we could just use that as it is if we wanted. What I'm going to do is just put a tiny wee bit of lemon, or keep calling it lemon, cadmium yellow in there, just to warm it slightly. But I'm not going to get too hung up. Then for my third tone, we'll maybe push that up so you can see that. We'll mix it down here actually. This time it's going to be quite deep, so we're going to start straight in with the burnt umber. This time we're adding a bit of ultramarine to it, which will make it really go towards something virgin on black. But obviously we don't want absolute black, because I don't think it's quite that dark on that side of the tree. But so we'll just lift it with a wee tiny small amount, you can see, of white. You can see hopefully it just taken on a slightly lighter tone than this. But we're going to do an awful lot of work to this painting in due course, so that's why I'm not going to be overly anxious about the thing. So a little bit of our liquid on the brush, just not too much, just enough to loosen the thing, and go ahead and get straight in. Okay, and be bold about this, because all we're doing at the moment is establishing these tones, and in a moment we'll work them together. Remember what we said about the STEM sort of ideas here, that will shapes, tones, the edges, how they relate, how they blend the edges, and then the marks, what sort of surface marks, you know, texture, for want of another word, you know. So we're gonna work, you know, that much. Then I'm gonna clean the brush, moisten a wee bit more of the paint, and this time go in with our mid, call it our mid-tone. And it might go over slightly over the top, but you can see, you know, I'm moving in all directions here. I'm not sort of painting it as if I was painting stripes on a wall. I want, from the very beginning, that's why I used that wee dodgy, you know, all beat up wee brush, because you can see already as I'm doing this, there's some sort of relationship of lumps going on down this middle section here, maybe a little bit up there as well. Just get a wee bit more there, because the edges on this side are going to make a difference. Okay, and it's nearly like a coloring exercise, really. Then let's get down now to our nice deep shady sort of areas. Bang that in, just let's get that nice curvy thing that I kind of like in there. So at this moment you can see that it looks almost slightly formal, you wouldn't say that it looks like a tree that has loads of texture, but this is what we want to create as we get into it. We'll just take that on as a dark area. I know there's light on the other side of this, so we can get that organized as well. We'll bring that up. There's a little bit of light also right up in the corner here, but let's just keep it as 3 quite simple areas here, okay? And what I might do, just as a reminder more than anything else, is take a wee bit of light down there. But what I'm going to do next, because that's not going to dry very quickly anyway, what I'm going to do is then just take and work with my blues and yellows to get a wee bit of green going on here. So obviously it's quite a wild green, and as always, if you want to subdue green, add a little bit of either red or reddish brown. And so I have a reddy brown there. You can see it going in there and how that brings the green down to a more khaki colour. Maybe lift it a wee bit. I think I overdid it there. I'll bring back the yellow and tiny amount of white just to lift it. But again, not getting too anxious about this. What the reason is, I just want to create some colour around the background so we can see how it relates to the rest of the tree and whatever. So I'm not being too fussy. It's just a green, any green at the minute, because we're going to refine it later on. So we're going to work around the edges so that you can see how the tree form lifts out. So there's no I was going to say there is no magic thing going on at the minute. We're just establishing how does one thing look beside the other in terms of its shape and its tone. Is one thing darker than the other or lighter than the other? And that's why I'm putting these green tones in at the moment. You can hear hopefully the brush, so you know how thin the paint is. You can tell by the amount of rubbing that I'm doing that I'm not putting the paint on thick. I'm having to rub it to cover up the background, if you like. And if I remember rightly, there was a little gap in here somewhere on the things. And now I can begin to make decisions. For example, just going to get rid of that line there. For example, I can say, well, how does this relate to that? In the photograph, there's a little more depth in the greens. So what I'm going to do is make a more of a bluish green, add in tiny amounts of my this Indian red color, just to earth it up a wee bit. And you can see how that's giving me a good excuse to darken that edge a little bit more. Make a few suggestions as if it's trees and all now. But remember, this is not a painting about the background. It's not a landscape or painting, so we've got to be careful. I'm very guilty of these things because I enjoy the action of painting. I sometimes allow myself to get carried away and not practice what I preach. So we'll not linger too much longer with this. We can always go back and sort this out later on. So what I'm going to do is say, right, that's enough, Sam, because I need someone to tell me that as well. All right, let's go back and think about what's in the tree. I'm just going to slightly move the light to get rid of some of the shine there. So we've got these 3 very obvious sections, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down now to a slightly smaller brush. So I'm going to take I'm actually going to take this It's not really that much smaller. This is the bristle brush, the little filbert shaped one. And just with the paint that's on here, I'm gonna just start to meld and mold one tone to the other. But you'll see that, you know, I'm deliberately making marks all sorts of directions, so that as I blend the two together, that they're not a lovely smooth. I don't want this to look like a pipe. I don't want to look like a tin of beans, a lovely smooth metal can. It's not. It's something that's full of ruggedness, and it's been around for years, and it's seen a lot of scratch and scrapes and weather and all sorts. So even at this early stage, when I'm working these together, and what we can do is go back and re-establish other bits so that we can bring the light back up and bring the dark back in and so on. And I'm looking at the picture to see, oh yeah, there's a bit of dark creeps over there. So I'm pulling what was simply 3 areas. I'm now kind of pulling it together, and I'm getting half areas, if you like, halfway tones, halfway houses and whatever. And all I want at the minute is to create something that beginning to look like has a form, a 3-dimensional form, and also has some sort of look of being rugged, rough, you know. It's very easy sometimes to get very careful, and then you lose the accidental marks. So, you know, it's quite fun, this, you know, squiggling around here. But we're beginning to get something that has that sort of quality. What I realize here, there's a bit of more dark going on up here, so I'll just go ahead and knock that in there, and then wipe the brush. Always remember, once you put paint on, if you then want to model the paint, then remember you don't necessarily want to put more paint on. So wipe it and then use the brush changes to a tool for being used for mark making. Okay, a wee bit of shadow down that side. Now, I'm not, with this little exercise, what I want to do is, I don't want to do this all in one go, because it'd be quite a nice idea. If you've been doing the exercise that I sent to do with the apple, you'll realize that letting the painting dry and then working glazes or other layers on top, kind of an exciting sort of method. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and apply that to this tree here. So at the minute, what I've got is just a very simple structure, and what I'm going to do is let this dry. Now, because I'm using liquid, I kind of hope that this will dry fairly quickly. What I'm going to do, actually, this bit up here is it's been annoying me for ages, and I know it's against what's in the picture, but so I just have this thing that I would like this to be branching into 2 branches, so I'm going to put a bit of green in there so that one goes one way and that goes the other. It makes this look a bit odd, so I'm just gonna, so you can see I'm not following the picture exactly, but what I want to stress before I stop here is the process is the same. Establish the biggest, most obvious blocks of tone that you can see, and don't get sidetracked by all the texture just yet. Block those in, then look at the edges of those tones. Do they blend or are they sharp? Well, they weren't sharp, they blended together. So blend those edges, that's the E, and blend them using marks that suggest ruggedness. And that gives you, if you like, a head start. Okay, so we now have a nice rugged looking structure, which will come back, and then we'll start to play with the idea of breaking it into smaller shapes and smaller textures. So what we have now is a dry painting, and just to refresh your memory, we just began with the simple biggest tonal range we could see, which were basically 3 sections light, medium, dark, I guess, and that was really it. And then with a brush, we worked these together so the edges became not crisp, but blended, if you like. And also, while we were at it, we deliberately made some squiggly lines to begin to suggest the surface of the tree, because as painters, we have to work certain degree by instinct as well. I mean, these exercises that I'm showing you aren't designed to turn you into robots that follow a certain process and that's it. What I'm trying to do is give you a framework, a way that you can achieve something, you can get things started. After that, the way you push the brush around, the way you manipulate it, all becomes much more up to you. So don't feel that this is a mechanical exercise. However, what we have now is this structure. When I look at the image that I'm working from, I can see that it's much more broken down. There's a lot more going on in it, as we know. So this is where we're going to break this up a wee bit. And what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to mix or use basic colors here. What I have working from that way is burnt umber with ultramarine blue. You can see how deep it is. This is burnt umber itself with a tiny little bit of white in there. This is burnt umber again with a lot more white, and this is actually cadmium yellow light, or indeed you could use lemon yellow, a wee bit of white, and a tiniest little bit of blue just to turn it a wee bit more green. So I'm going to work with these. They will get mixed up and mixed together and so on, but that's the sort of batches of them that I've got on my palette here to my left that I'm going to work with and see if we can achieve something. So I'm just simply going to begin. I'll begin with the. I'll just reach over here and get my medium. I'm still using a little bit of liquid, but to be honest, if I am, it's just the brush is just damped with it. You can see it's not exactly dripping. It's just enough to be damp and no more. But what I'm looking at here now is just getting some more of the mix on my brush here. Beg your pardon. So here you notice, by the way, just in case, I'm actually using this small brush. That's what I forgot to mention. That's that little nylon brush. It's a number 2 or number 4. You can see by my hands, it's quite small. The reason is because I want now to begin to make a few more small squiggly marks to help add to the surface quality. But at first, this is going to seem again like another slightly like a jigsaw thing. But because of the nature of oils, you see, we can manipulate it later on. So you can see there's a patch, simple patch going on there. I'm looking down my photographs and there's a patch here. So these are all very, I'm trying to pick out areas that I believe are quite deep. And the paint, as I say, is fairly thick, but I'm not putting too much on. And what I'll maybe try shortly is to try and zoom in if I can and show you a close-up here. I'm not sure if I can, but I will try. But you can hear how I'm rubbing that. So I'm not laying it on like butter, thick butter on a toast or whatever. That assumes that I eat my toast with thick lumps of butter, which I shouldn't really. But anyway, and we're going to block a bit in there and work around. We don't need to include every single element here, but there's a nice sort of dark, almost like a crack up the middle of the tree here I'm seeing, and I'm going to put that on. So look how almost crude this seems, a little bit there, block there, a little bit, another wee bit there as it comes down into the roots at the bottom there. Then let's go up here again, get that there. There's a wee bit of darkness here and a wee bit there. And then up here, I decided actually to put a V in there. I went ahead when it was drying. You can see that. You can also see that I put in a suggestion of sky and land, just to make it the thing feel as if it belongs, in a scene, if you like. So there's bits where I think I see them on the photograph, and I know there are more, but I just want to keep it simple at this moment. I'm going to move on now to my next tone. I'll just get that this mixed up. So this is the umber with a little bit of white in it. So it's that wee bit cooler, if you like, a wee bit less severe. And it's actually not unlike the color that's already down, to be honest with you. But so we're going to put a bit of that in here. And there's a sort of round bit there. And you can hear that's why the little brush is good. And we'll hopefully see the benefits of this shortly when we merge the paint together in some way. Then we'll have some light beginning to happen down here. There's a patch. You can if you want, and I've suggested this to some people, that you can. There's no reason why you can't take your photograph, print it, and trace round the little individual. Now, I wouldn't get the habit of that. I'm only suggesting that as a way to help you along. I think eventually what you want to do is get to the point where you're doing what I'm doing. I'm looking at the photograph and saying, oh, I see a bit there. Just go ahead and do it. But sometimes if it helps make life a little more bearable, you can do that. I'm dipping back and forward when I've just spot a nice dark bit there, a dark bit here, okay? And then what I'm going to do is going to move to the next tone. So this is the umber with a bit more white in it. And it's because actually when you look at the mid area of the tree, there's a couple of light patches here, you know. And you know what? The thing is, you could, without the photograph, say, look, I'm going to put a whole lot of patches on randomly and do this exercise, and you probably get something from it, you know. I'll put that there. This little branch here is a little bit lighter. I think it's because I need to do something with the background, but anyway, we'll plow on. Up the middle here, there's a light area going up there. So it's beginning to look slightly like a piece of camouflage or something, you know. There's another light bit, a couple of light bits here, but actually as we get over to this left side, the color moves more to this nice yellow, greeny yellow color that we talked about. So I want to get some of that in here. So there we go. I'm going to start to put in these areas down that side and here. Just make a wee bit more of it up actually, because I just want to be able to not have to stop and start too much. So there is my color going in. It's frustrating, I know, because I'm here talking away and so there's some of that there. I'm happier with that actually. A little bit more punch in it, you know. So up this side, we'll go ahead and get all the way up there. And again, look what I'm doing. I'm rubbing this scribbly little brush, this tiny little, well, not tiny, but relatively small brush, you know. That side there, I'll put a wee bit. And I suppose, you know, effectively filling in gaps here on this side. So I know that above all, what I do want is lighter and warmer on the left, cooler and darker on the right, because that seems to be what's going on in the painting, or rather in the tree, I should say. And there's a little tiny bit of it maybe down there. Okay, so let's say we've got that. Okay, so there we've created new shapes on top. So there's our S for shapes, T for tone. So you can see that the yellowy color was the lightest tone and so on. I showed you at the beginning this here. So I've tried to sort of get a range of tones in there. Edges is next. So this is where we really want to go and merge the edges. What I'm going to try to do first, I'm going to try to pause this, go in close and see if you can see the way it behaves in terms of the paint. Now here we are, nice and close zoomed in. I quite love this image actually. When I zoomed in, I thought this is lovely. It's like a nice big abstract painting, you know. But I've just taken a section of this. Here is the same brush pretty much. I've just given it a little bit of a wipe, because I know the paint is wet here. And just to let you see, you know, the paint is not loaded. You can see it's not exactly thick, lumpy paint. And you can hear the way I'm rubbing it. So if you watch the way I'm pushing, I've got a rag in one hand, ready to wipe, because, you know, again, as always, we're essentially removing paint in a way. So I'm taking a rag here and rubbing the brush every now and again. So you can see this little section as I run this yellow down into that, wipe the brush. I'm going to take a little bit of this dark and rub the edges around a little bit here. Not too much, because if I do this, I remove it and I lose that dark line, which is what I put in the beginning. Lightly sometimes, just merging it. White brush. And I'm just keeping on working from one part to the other. Rub, white, rub. And you can see how it's all beginning to sort of merge a little bit. And it's not these hard lines anymore. So in a minute what I'll do is I'll zoom back out again so that we can get a sense of how it impacts on the thing overall, okay? So I'm sort of carrying a little bit of tone from one side to the other, but overall I'm trying to keep the deeper side on one side and the lighter side on the other, and so on. I'm really actually taking a certain amount of paint off, but you can see as I scratch it how it's making a different grainy surface, okay? And what we're doing, of course, we lose some of the tonal range this way, because what I'm doing is picking paint up, carrying it over here, so the light is getting from there to there. So we do lose that, and this is where in the next section we're going to have to revamp that. So what you do is you're putting tone on, you're losing it to some extent, but you're gaining the surface. Then you let it dry, then you put more tone on and rub it back a little bit more delicately, so until you get to that surface that you want. So I'm going to again pause it a moment and go back out and try to let you see the bigger picture. So you can see now, as we've zoomed out, this is the little section I was rubbing at, how it's beginning to integrate more. And you can see this bit up near the top where it hasn't been touched yet. It looks unusual. It looks like just big lumps of paint, which is what it is. So you can see how we've made the paint and modeling the paint. And now we're getting the beginnings of some lumpiness about the actual tree itself. And I'm working down in here, wiping with the brush as always, or wiping the brush as always, rubbing a wee bit. And as I say, I'm losing a little bit of tonal range, but that is the nature of this particular technique. We're going to go back and redo that. What I'll do is actually I've just realized we need a wee bit of color up here in these gaps here that I didn't put on earlier. Then wipe the brush, lightly just scribble. And the reason I'm rubbing up and down is because that seems to be giving me a mark that's suggesting the lumpiness of the tree. That's the only reason. It might be a different object where it might require dots or squiggles or something else, you know. And that's the M of our word STEM, marks. So we're always looking for the best mark to suggest the material that we're dealing with. So again, rubbing a little bit, not rubbing until these all merge into one if we can avoid it, and back into this nice yellowish green, mossy color at the edge there, and then rub that. You can hear that's a little bit harder, all the way up there, you know. And we can begin to see now that we've moved, so a bit of paint on there, moved on from the previous stage of the painting to another stage, which is a little bit richer, a wee bit more lumpy, a wee bit more tree-like. So we could do two things at this point. We could continue by adding, because we've lost a bit of tone, you know, the dark that was really dark here is not as dark because I've been pulling it around. I can go back, I suppose, if you wish. One option is to keep on working wet into wet. So for example, I'm just mixing some that nice dark paint that I had earlier, a little bit more of that, and I can go in the same little brush and I might say, okay, let's get that in again. Look, let's re-establish that a bit more. Rub the brush and then work the edges a little bit. And don't work into that bit too much. So I can continue, you can see, getting the nice deep tones back in, the ones that I lost, block them in, and then wipe the brush, and then with a clean brush, trail and scrub the edges in to the other tones beside it. And you can see now, it makes sense. So we have that option. I'm just gonna put a little bit in here. I might sneeze in a minute, so beg your pardon if I do. Pardon me. There you go. An original sneeze on on camera. So I'm repainting the darks in and then feathering out the edges. Okay. And we're beginning to get that weightiness to the tree. So that's one method. What I'll do on this side a wee bit later is another method, which is about letting it dry. So if you looked at the apple exercise that I put on video, where we dealt with monochrome black and white painting first, let it dry, and then glaze the color very, very thin over it. So we can, that's another option. I can continue this method. In fact, I might for a moment or two take, and go back in and put a little bit of light here and there, look. So we can continue wet into wet, and what we'll do is we'll then work the glazing method, the thin tone on top, or thin color later on. But you see now I'm thinking, all right, I want this light up here again because I lost that. There's a little light that was going on down in the bottom of the roots here. So I'll put that on, clean the brush again, and then just lightly with the same pattern, not up and down squiggle. It's working for me at the minute, so I'll just stick with it. And then the same with those other little bits I just put in. Don't overdo it because they'll disappear into the wet paint around them and we kind of lose it a bit. It's losing it there, so I have to stop and keep moving on. And then maybe take some of my deeper tones. I just realized that, down the side of this tree or this branch, there's quite a dark bit. And down the side of maybe this branch, there's a bit of a dark there too. And the thing is, you start to notice things. There's lovely dark sort of crack thing, or split in the wood or something there. Again, I'd lost that a moment ago, but I've put it back, cleaning my brush, and then ever so lightly just softening up the edges in that stripy way, and that like grain of wood really. I'm trying to suggest the pattern that a grain of wood would almost make. And you can see that is beginning to integrate. And we can go up and down, we can pick out highlights, a wee bit of nice light in here, a bit of there and there, just putting it on and then manipulating it. But as long as we manipulate it in an even, meaningful way with the brush, we will slowly get something that will be that much more believable. What I might do then shortly is to let this dry. I'm quite enjoying working with it, so that's yet again one of my problems, putting it on. There we go, slash it on, put a daub on there, look at that green, wipe the brush and slash it. But here's the danger, and it's something that happens to people, and I'm going to do it here just to let you see. You have these nice areas that look like lumps. You come along with your brush and go, yeah, let's get the effect of that. And I'm rubbing and rubbing. And I keep on scrubbing and scrubbing until, as you can see, this whole area has disappeared. And that only took me a couple of seconds, 5 seconds at most. So it shows you how easy that is if you don't keep concentration. So in other words, if I put that down and I want to get it back, then yes, do that, but know to not keep on round and round and round, because that's where it will just literally disappear. So we've just got a wee suggestion of it, and when I see that, stop. You can always come back, sort it out later, but don't overdo it, okay? So what I'll maybe do is just let that sit, let it dry. I might actually, while I'm letting it dry, calm down the background a bit because I'd like to zoom into the tree a bit more. And then we'll come back to this when it's dry and we'll talk about how to put even thinner tones on top of this. This painting now is dry. So what I've done is I've zoomed into this little part, hopefully so that you can see the brush marks going on to this section first of all. A couple of things. One is I'm going to try to stick with this sort of color range more or less just as a selection. That's our burnt umber with ultramarine, which is virtually on the verge of black. This is burnt umber, tiniest wee bit of white, but very, very little. This is burnt umber with an increasing amount of white. And this is burnt umber, beg your pardon, this is lemon yellow, tiny little bit of ultramarine to give it a greenish tint, and a little bit of white. This is quite yellowish. I'm actually going to maybe mix a slightly greener version of that. But basically I have a range of tone here, but they're all going to be mixed. The reason why I've chosen this range is to keep it simple more than anything else, because as I say before, what we're focusing on is surface and texture, not necessarily color. Now the second thing is what I've decided to do. I'm using this flat brush. You might remember earlier on I was using a flat brush to block in. This was this brush here. I blocked in the major tones. That's relatively soft nylon brush. What I've done is get a brush. This happens to be the same size more or less, and also straight flat top, but it's a bristle brush, so it's stiffer and slightly firmer. The reason is that it's almost like a knife. You can see that sharp edge along the thing there. You can see the brush mark going on there, and it's easier to rub firmly with a firm brush. I always liken it to, if you think of the idea of brushing a floor, and you know we talked about a floor brush and a yard brush. A floor brush was soft, which was great for sweeping away kind of dust and small bits and pieces. But if you took that brush outside and tried to brush away sand or gravel out of your garden, it wouldn't work. It would just collapse. You needed a yard brush, which is a big stiff fibered brush and has that more strength to rub. So that's the equivalent of what I have here. It's slightly stiffer. You can use other brushes. You know, you can use a smaller brush, something that will give you that firmness is all I'm talking about. Now what I'm going to do is, hopefully you can see, there's the dark that I've got on this brush. It's very, very little paint. I really don't want too much paint, because remember, we want some of this information to come through in a transparent way. So I'm going to put on, just to let you see that little mark there that's going on. You see the nice knife-like sharp shapes I'm able to make with this brush. So this is the advantage of a square-headed brush like this, if you want to make marks to suggest wood grain or whatever. But it's going on very lightly, and I hope you can see there that the colors behind it or underneath are still shining through. In other words, the paint I'm putting on is very slightly transparent because I'm rubbing it. And actually the one load, if you notice, I haven't dipped my paint, or pardon me, haven't dipped my brush in the paint. I'm just continuing to rub. If you look, we'll go up here, rub a little bit. Do you see how those lines, they're creeping up? If I stand and rub for a moment or two, you can see the little trickles mark, and then I can come in and pick up another piece of color. So at the moment I'm working with the dark paint, but you can see those vertical slash marks, knife marks almost, up and down. And I'm blending one into the other to make a sort of interesting variety. So where we have dark suggests an indentation, where we have light suggests something that's sticking out. So I can vary. This is why I'm saying I'm going to mix as I go. So for instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip now into the slightly lighter tone. And I'm going to put vertical lines, you can see here. And what I don't want is it to look like stripes. So I'm blending it to some extent, you can see there. I'm just not going stripes. I'm sort of merging them. So that paint I put on a moment ago, that darker paint, might merge slightly with this lighter paint. And so on. I'll go back now, I give the brush a clean, go down here, to a slightly darker tone here coming up. I'm going to zoom out in a minute because obviously you're only seeing parts of that, but you can see the marks, slash marks. Now I can put a few of these vertical lines on like this. Look, I can take my brush, wipe it with a rag completely. Now watch what's going to happen at the top of these. With this fairly clean brush, I'm just dragging them, stretching them out so they disappear into the rest of the picture, the painting I should say, so they don't look like they suddenly stopped. And I can continue to build with variations of tone and color until I make that richer. So what I'm going to do is pause, zoom out again, and show you the rest of this happening with the fuller picture, if you like. So now we can see the bigger picture, and you can see the little area that I was working on here. So what I'm going to do for a little bit of time is just work from light to dark, from the yellows to the black, the browns, and so on, to see how that changes the surface quality of this tree. Now we're getting some more refinement, more detail into it. So I'm going to work actually just down on the light side. As I said before, remember that every time we blend, we lose tone. Every time we blend tones together, we lose the contrast, obviously. So that's happened a couple of times, and now we're on to our third layer of paint, if you like. And I'm just mixing up some lighter greeny tones here. And again, with the same little slash marks you can see going on there, I'm going to actually make that a little bit more yellow. I want it to be a bit warmer on that side because it's kind of like mossy color. But anyway, here we go. And this is the M that we talked about, STEM. This is where I'm thinking M is marks. The marks that I'm making, I'm trying to make to be appropriate to the subject matter. And they're not designed to be all even. You can see what I'm doing here is when I get a wee bit of that light, clean the brush, put a little bit dark in here, and you can see that this is really quite dark. But remember, I know when these are blended that I will soften the tone. So there's two quite hard edges, if you like. Now I'm cleaning the brush, wiping the brush completely, going in with a near enough clean brush and just feathering out the tops, still using that same type of mark, rubbing up and down. So one slowly merges with the other, and we'll merge that across here. We'll maybe carry a little bit of dark sometimes over into the light. So we'll have so we're mixing and matching, but we do want it generally to go from light over to dark. What I'll do then, I'll get in some of the mid-tone browns here. So I'm just going to squeeze a little bit more umber out, so bear with me. I just want umber on its own rather than being with the blue on it. That makes it too grey sometimes. So we've got a nice warmer umber here on the end of the brush. Again, not too much. I'm just working this in. It's pretty much similar color to what was already on there, but the difference this time is I'm just building up the marks. And this depends, the other thing about this is that this idea of marks depends on your style of painting. You don't necessarily need to follow the marks I'm making. These marks are just me suggesting ways in which you can create the illusion of a surface of a tree bark, a tree trunk. So I'm just slashing away here, and it is about a certain degree of patience too. I'm going to get a little bit darker maybe in underneath the corner here of where the branches disappear. Wipe the brush and then just start to work them up, work those marks slightly up and stretch them down into the other marks. And because the paint isn't that thick, little bits of color come through. It's very, very, very subtle, but it's important to realize that oil paints are transparent. And again, I haven't dipped the brush in a paint for a while. If you notice, I'm just rubbing, I'm stretching to try and get as much paint off the brush as I can. And then maybe let's go back to a little bit lighter tone here, the grayer tone actually, get a wee bit more brown into it. So again, have a little light section maybe here, as if the tree is coming forward as a ridge. And basically allow yourself to experiment here, you know, and watch all of the nice things that kind of occur. I'll put some on there. It's quite thick actually, so I'm wiping the brush. And all I want to do is that tiny little bit of paint will keep me going for some time. If you watch that as I'm working and cutting the paint, it's still going, it's still stretching and mixing, so you don't need much paint. And we can continue this process. We can go in here, maybe a nice bit of dark there. And then again, cut it across. And eventually, and it is a matter of being patient, eventually you do get a relationship starting to happen between the colors. You can see there. And then the thing is, when we get to this point, there are other marks. I mean, the tree isn't just consisting of these vertical slashes, as you know. There are other things that go on within the surface of trees and things like that. Some of it's lumpy, some of it's smoother. So what we can do in that case is, I'm just going to finish this bit first, this side. What I can do is turn the brush around to the flat side rather than cutting it with the edge, and just gently tapping as we've done before. And some of these areas will go soft again, but not, we don't want all of them to go completely soft, just here and there, just taking them down. So we don't want it to look like, as I keep saying, we don't want it to look like stripes. So we need to just go in there, calm it down. So we put marks on, we calm them, put more marks on, calm them down, and so on. We can change then the brushes we're using, for example. So if I take that little small brush I used a bit earlier, this tiny little filbert soft brush, I can perhaps say, okay, within this there are other marks, there are knots and things in here, and the same process applies. Look, these are odd looking when I put them on, but I'm going to unify, I'm going to drag them in to the rest of the picture in a moment or two. So putting them on, wipe the brush. I can go back if I wanted to that nice soft flat brush I used way early on, this one here, or a brush similar to that, and then just very gently with this, drag those in so they're just out of focus, and drag that a little bit, so on, drag this one, so on. And suddenly they no longer look like just pieces of paint stuck on. They look like they're maybe cuts and rugged chips that have been taken out of the tree over time. And this process can continue for some time. It's great. This I find very, very much the fun part of it, you know, putting big lumps down like that, you know, and maybe we'll stick another one up there, look, you know, and just be bold about it, you know, big lump there. Looks all, you know, you don't need to be even neat, because the neatness will come when this nice soft brush comes in, when it's cleaned off quite a lot. And now we can say, oh, what if we drag the bottom of that shape? There, look. And what if we drag the top up a wee bit? And then what if we turn it around to the flat side and just calm that all down a little bit, so that it merges rather than sticks. So we have a nice deep lump cut out of the wood there. We'll do the same with this. We'll make that a wee bit broader perhaps. And my brush is barely touching the board, you know. It's staying very, very light. We'll take that one. That goes off. Maybe leave that as a nice hole at the bottom. But what I'll do is just gently soften the very, very edges of it, so that it doesn't look like a spot, so that it drags its way up into the tree and becomes part of the tree. So you have this nice gnarled bit at the bottom. And likewise over here, you know, drag that down, create a shape, wipe the brush again, because the brush is not to apply paint this time round. The brush is now to push paint. The paint is already on the tree. We've already decided that. And then wipe again and drag. And we can continue that over there actually, because I know that the side of the tree is really quite dark. So let's put a couple more lumps of nice dark over the top of this. Look, really in there, and you know, big lump in here. Look, lump up there. You know, we'll try and turn that light around a wee bit so we can see that better. And now take those gnarly bits, wipe the brush, clean each brush, tap around the edges. And this is where that word edge is coming from again. Wiping and tapping. You can hear sometimes I'm rubbing very hard because it's quite dry, the paint still on this side. Clean the brush, rub, and keep an eye on what's happening. Be aware of what you notice and think, oh, that's good, or maybe that's not what I want. You know, you're always trying to assess as you go. And that's the thing too. Sometimes we get carried away with the enjoyment of this, and I do too. It's lovely to push the paint around, but I have to say, hold on now, is that the way I want it to be? Or, you know, so you can hear me rubbing that. I still want it dark, but I don't want it to be hard. And you can see how it's beginning to blend in. There's a wee bit of suggestions of light catching that, even the shady side of the tree. I'll just take that down there and give that a nice sweep at the bottom of the trunk there, you know. And again, this bit here, it's a wee bit rough. Clean brush, pretty much clean brush. And just, you can hear, just feather it in until it stains around the immediate area. So you can see we're getting gnarlier and gnarlier. The tree hopefully is beginning to look a bit more aged, a bit more old. You know, maybe put a dark shadow in there. And again, white brush, clean, and use the brush as your modeling tool. So brush to apply there, wipe it, and then brush to model. So the brush has two functions at least. But to try to do both of them together can often be the problem. People forget to clean the brush before they do the modeling bit, so they're stuck with loads of paint on the brush, and it gets all over the place. So you can see here what I'm doing with this is, you know, I'm just working that. And take your time. If it takes a while to rub in, so be it, you know. Allow some of those greens to come through, you know, and then we can maybe go back to some nice light tones, maybe, you know, picking up maybe some of the edges of this tree here, or this branch there and there. Put those in. This is very, very light. It's nearly white, but it's got a little bit of umber in it. And actually maybe what I'll do is put a wee bit of lemon in there, you know. So I'm getting a wee bit more bold with my colours, I have to confess, but I kind of like that, and I think it's working okay. And you can see here that it looks again slightly strange, you know, these big bits, but it's what I'm doing now with my brush. Once it's cleaned, there we are, just tickling it together with that edge of that brush, flat brush, and dragging this bit down into the rest of the tree and up. Wipe the brush again, because remember, every time we model paint, we're also picking it up. So slowly our brush gets filled with paint that maybe we don't want to be there. And get that one, feather it around, but don't overdo it, because then it disappears, you know. And we're getting some nice light catching the lumps of the tree there. You can see these nice bits, and quite like those, the drama of that there. And then maybe we also have little deep bits as the tree disappears around the other side. So put a line there, clean the brush again, and just rub with the knife edge of the brush until that softens and disappears into the rest of it, so that it looks like it kind of belongs more, you know. And so we go. We can continue this process for quite some time. Application, then modeling. application, then modeling. And yes, there might come a time when we need to say, okay, let that dry and go back again, and that's okay, you know. Put a couple of little knots maybe in here and here, look, and then again, model. You know, we can use the side of the brush or the flat of the brush, depending on what effect we would like to have. So we're suggesting there a little bit of a lumpiness, maybe calm those stripes down a wee bit and so on. So we can make decisions constantly about what's going on in these lumps. I can go back, I can say, okay, let's really make it even gnarlier, the tree, maybe a lot more going on. So you can see there, I'm back to that little small filbert brush. And what I'll do here is I'll take, again, bits, look at this, you know, make gnarly things down one side, look, you know, make a, you know, so I'm going a bit extreme here, but this is part of it. Make marks down there, take our darker marks, maybe go back in the gnarliness of that, make a crack there, and it looks absolutely weird. Suddenly they've done that. But let's say this time I keep my little soft small brush, not the flat brush, and now just in a smaller scale, feather and merge these together a wee bit, but not too much. White brush, feather and model a little bit more. Wipe the brush, feather the edges of that one, just working around the outside of it. Then maybe the darker tones, soften those, wipe, soften them, constantly looking at what's happening. Is it interesting? Is it anything like what I want? But now what we're doing at least is getting colors or tones merging. They don't look like spots. Rub that in around the edges, leave enough of it to have an impact. Clean the brush again there. Clean the brush constantly, or frequently I should say. Work around, I like that light bit, so I don't want to rub it too much. White brush, going into the dark area here. So I'm merging the colors, but following a method to it. Just, you can hear that sound. That shows you how little I'm pushing, you know, or how much I'm stretching the paint. And you can see how this changes the surface yet again. Suddenly our tree becomes something slightly different. And again, patching and rubbing. You notice I'm generally following a vertical mark, you know, because I think that suits this subject, but we could change that too. So you hear me rubbing, moving, rubbing, moving. You know, don't be afraid to let yourself go with this exercise. We can see there that the lumpiness beginning to happen. It can be small lumps or big lumps. What I mean by that is I could take this flat brush, which is fairly big, and I could take, I'm just gonna do this for the sake. I'm gonna put a big lump of dark there. Look, watch this. So I'm changing this again. I'm being quite courageous. I'm going to put in mid-tone. I'm going to paint over that. So this is thicker paint, okay? Just to show you can do it this way as well. Big lump there, stripe down there, big lump there. Let's get a bit of yellow or something in there. There, 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 and there, okay? And you notice what I'm still doing though is trying to retain the idea that it's dark on that side, light on this side. So even though that looks, you know, very gung-ho and very, you know, cavalier or slapping this on, I'm still trying to remember I'm not just doing it in any way, if you like. Now what I'm going to do is we'll keep this flat brush going, and this time we'll make a slightly bolder mark. So watch how I'm just cutting through. I'm using the sort of flat of the brush there. Did you notice that? I'm not upright. I'm down flat this time. Rub, wipe. Rub, wipe. Little patches. move, rub, move, rub, move, rub, move. Wipe, rub. So I'm moving and carrying a little bit of paint from one to the other as long as I'm still trying to suggest dark over the light. Emerging slightly, but as I see a pattern, a texture emerging, I'm moving away. I'm not over lingering because then I'll lose it. Wiping the brush constantly. Wipe, rub, move, rub, move. Bum, 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 like that. Go back to my dark maybe just to get a little bit more dark in there. And you see that we create a new type of surface, a different method, if you like, of creating surface of a tree, but it works in a different way. It's a different style. You can see there that the tree is taking on a nice, indented sort of quality. And we can go on like that for a long time. Then we also have options of, playing around with removing parts of the paint, So I can take a little bit of tissue paper, roll it up here, and just a scrap of paper, and I can wipe back to the color below, so you can see hopefully the little pinky bits coming through there. Rub that, and the tissue or rag is becoming a tool to make marks. But you see I'm rubbing and moving, rub, move, rub, move, and again you can see a lovely warm surface coming through. And so you can, this can go on for a very long time. But what I'm trying to say, I hope, is that these are lots of ways to create surfaces and suggest, in this case, a tree. But we still adhere to the fundamental process, which is dark and light. We want light and shade to suggest the form of the object. We want to stick to the shapes, that we see. And we want to stick to how the edges relate. Are they hard edges or soft edges? Are they smooth or rugged? And what type of mark are we going to make? And I've made three different types of mark here in this tree to show you that you don't need to use the same type of mark with a brush to create textures. I could even do more on this. I could go back and even do more, but one way or another, we're creating the surface as long as we watch what we do and we say it's making sense. The light tones come forward, dark tones go in. That's what gives us the undulation of the branch of the tree. That's what makes it look three-dimensional. So in other words, if I perhaps, and I might want to do this, that, maybe coming in from this side, there was a bit of a darkness there. And maybe another bit there, look. Just put it in as a sort of half moon shape down the side of the tree there, look. And then, again, clean the brush. And again, if I work the edges of this a little bit, this will suggest an indent in the tree. That the tree is like a joint of human body, coming in like at someone's hips or something. It's an indentation. And again, wiping and merging this one a little bit. And you can see that I now have the suggestion that there's a you could put your hand in, it would flow in and out around the tree, whereas before the tree looked pretty even on that side. And I can continue that. I can make a tree that's very rugged, because if I went in and did that, for instance, put that in and put that in there, and maybe big lump sticking in there, so these are coming right out, and then do the same again, work these in, wipe the brush, merge. You can see that cut, that indentation looks more extreme now. It looks like the tree has got a big indentation. And likewise down here, if I just soften that, there's those little vertical slash marks, just bringing it in. And again, we feel it, our hand would come in and out and in and out. And likewise with that one. So no matter what type of brush mark we use, the fundamental rule is the same. The dark suggests indentations usually, light will stick out. Likewise, if I was to say, well, let's highlight that bit and highlight a bit there, look, and then wipe the brush and again merge it into the bit above, clean the brush and gently merge the bottom of it slightly towards the dark. We now have a little lump that wasn't there before because the light suggests lumps. There we're feathering that up, feathering that down slightly. There's a little bit of highlight, and look how lumpy that has become, whereas earlier on it was flat. If I was to take a brush and just say, look, let's get rid of all that, let's merge it all into one tone, the tree is no longer gnarly, it's quite flat on that side. It doesn't have those lumps anymore. So there's a lot to take in there, I know, but please have a go with this. Follow the process. Don't over ladle the paint on. Remember, apply paint, clean brush, and then use the brush as a modeling tool, or alternatively use a separate brush, but don't have loads of paint on at the time when you're modeling the paint. You put your material on and then you go in and work with that. You don't constantly add more. That's why it often becomes so heavy that you can't do anything more with it. So give that a go and let me see how that goes.